The phone rang at 12:17 a.m. I was half asleep in my recliner, my left knee throbbing from the cold, when the screen lit up. Emily, my daughter. I answered on the second ring. Dad? Her voice cracked. For a second, I thought something terrible had happened to one of the kids. Emily, what's wrong? There was a long pause. Then I heard her crying. Not the polite kind of crying people do when they're embarrassed. Real crying. Dad, why is your face on every news station? I sat there blinking. The television was still on across the room. The volume was low. Some overnight news program was running. I looked from the screen to the phone and back again. Emily, what are you talking about? You were on Channel 7, then Channel 2. Gary just found another clip online. I rubbed my eyes. My hands still stung from a cut I'd gotten earlier that night. Sweetheart, slow down. She took a shaky breath. Dad, I didn't know. And right there, before she said another word, I knew exactly what she meant. Because 6 hours earlier, my daughter had told me not to come for Christmas. The strange thing is, that wasn't even the worst conversation we'd ever had. Not by a long shot. The worst conversations usually happen quietly. No yelling, no slammed doors, no dramatic speeches. Just a few words that stay with you longer than they should. 3 days earlier, I was sitting at my kitchen table in Dayton, Ohio, paying bills and pretending retirement was as relaxing as everyone says it is. My house was quiet. Too quiet, if I'm being honest. My wife and I had divorced 15 years earlier. Since then, I'd learned how to live alone. You learn little routines. You make coffee for one. You eat leftovers for 2 nights instead of one. You talk to the dog. Then the dog dies and you talk to yourself. Life gets smaller. Not bad, just smaller. The bright spots were always my daughter and my grandkids. At least they used to be. I still remember teaching Emily how to ride a bike in the parking lot behind our church. I remembered sitting through dance recitals that felt longer than some wars. I remembered helping her move into her first apartment, then helping her move out, then helping her move again. That's what fathers do, or at least that's what I thought. My phone rang that afternoon. Emily. I smiled when I saw her name. Hey, kiddo. Hi, Dad. Something sounded off immediately. Parents know. It doesn't matter if your children are 5 or 35. You know. Everything okay? I asked. Yeah. Too fast. Then silence. I leaned back in my chair. What is it? Another pause. Finally, she said it. Mom and Gary are hosting Christmas this year. Gary, my ex-wife's husband. They'd been married about 6 years. Gary wasn't a monster, that's the thing. Life would actually be easier if he were. He wasn't abusive. He wasn't cruel. He was just the kind of man who always needed to be the most important person in the room. If somebody told a fishing story, Gary caught a bigger fish. If somebody ran a marathon, Gary ran too. If somebody volunteered, Gary volunteered more. After a while, it became exhausting. Still, I kept things civil. For Emily. Always for Emily. Okay, I said, what time should I come over? The line went quiet. That's when I knew. My stomach sank before she even answered. Dad? I stared out the window at the snow piled against the mailbox. Dad, maybe this year. She stopped, then started again. We're trying to make Gary feel more like part of the family. I didn't say anything. Honestly, I wasn't sure I heard her correctly. So, she cleared her throat. Maybe it'd be better if you sat this Christmas out. The words settled into the room slowly like dust. I looked at the Christmas tree standing in the corner. The same artificial tree I'd owned for almost 20 years. A few ornaments Emily made in elementary school still hung on the lower branches. One was a crooked clay angel. Another was a popsicle stick snowman. I'd kept them all, apparently longer than she'd kept me. Are you there? She asked softly. Yeah, I swallowed. Yeah, I'm here. Dad, please don't take this personally. That almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because there was absolutely no other way to take it. But I could hear the discomfort in her voice. She already knew she was hurting me. She just wanted permission to do it. So I gave it to her. I understand, sweetheart. Another silence. Really? Sure. The lie came out smoother than I expected. We talked another minute, nothing important. Then the call ended. I sat there alone. The refrigerator hummed. The furnace kicked on. Outside snow drifted across the street. I stayed at the table for nearly 20 minutes, just sitting, thinking, trying to decide whether I was angry. The truth? I wasn't. Not at first. Mostly I felt tired. Tired in a way that's hard to explain unless you're past 60. Not physically, emotionally. Like you'd spent years carrying something heavy and suddenly realized nobody noticed you were carrying it. The next morning I went shopping anyway. I bought gifts for the grandkids, a remote control truck for Ethan, an art set for Lily. For Emily, I bought something different. Not expensive, just meaningful. Over the next 2 nights, I sat at my dining room table putting together a photo album. 30 years of memories, birthday parties, school plays, fishing trips, graduations, family vacations, pictures she'd probably forgotten existed. I spent hours organizing them, sometimes smiling, sometimes staring at a photo longer than I should have. By Christmas Eve, the album was finished. I wrapped it carefully, then I loaded everything into my old Ford pickup. I told myself I was only dropping off gifts, nothing more. No speeches, no guilt trip, no surprise visit. Just one last fatherly responsibility. At least that's what I thought. I had no idea that before the night was over, my entire life would be sitting on the evening news. Christmas Eve arrived gray and cold, the kind of Ohio winter day where the sky looks like a sheet of dirty steel, and the wind somehow finds its way through every layer of clothing. I woke up around 6 o'clock, couldn't sleep anymore. Retirement had done that to me. My body still thought it had a job. I made coffee, fed the birds in the backyard, watched a pair of cardinals fight over the feeder. Then I stared out the kitchen window longer than necessary. I kept looking at my phone, not because I expected Emily to call, because part of me hoped she would. Maybe she'd changed her mind. Maybe she'd realized how ridiculous the whole thing was. Maybe she'd say, "Dad, forget what I said. Just come." The phone stayed silent. Around 10 o'clock, I loaded the gifts into my truck. The roads weren't terrible yet. A light snow had started falling, but Dayton had seen worse. I drove across town to Emily's neighborhood, a newer subdivision. Big houses, perfect lawns, the kind of place where every garage looked cleaner than my living room. I pulled into her driveway. For a minute, I just sat there. I could see Christmas decorations through the front window. A giant tree, colored lights, movement inside, people laughing. The grandkids were probably already excited. I imagined Ethan running around in his dinosaur pajamas, Lily showing everyone whatever craft project she'd made at school. I almost got out, almost walked to the front door, almost knocked. Instead, I grabbed the gifts. I carried them to the porch, set them down carefully. Then I added the photo album on top. No note, no message, nothing dramatic, just gifts. I stood there a moment longer. Then I turned around and walked back to my truck. The entire delivery took less than 2 minutes. Still hurt like hell. I drove away before anyone saw me. Or maybe before I saw them. Sometimes there's a difference. Back home, I spent the afternoon doing absolutely nothing useful. I watched part of a Browns game from years ago, one I'd already seen. Then I heated up some leftover barbecue from a place downtown. The ribs were dry. The coleslaw tasted like refrigerator. I ate it anyway. Around 4 o'clock, I pulled out a box of old DVDs. Years earlier, I'd converted a bunch of family videotapes. Emily as a kid, birthday parties, school events, vacations. I slid one into the player. The screen flickered. Suddenly, there she was. 8 years old, missing 2 front teeth, riding a bike for the first time. "Don't let go," she shouted. "You got it," my younger voice answered. Then I immediately let go. She pedaled 20 feet before realizing she was alone. The look of pride on her face nearly broke me. I watched another hour, then another. By evening, the house felt smaller than usual. The Christmas tree glowed quietly in the corner. A little artificial thing I'd assembled myself. Nothing impressive, but enough. Around 7:30, I considered doing something stupid. I thought about driving back. Not to start an argument, not to force my way into dinner, just to see the kids. Maybe wave through the window, maybe leave after 5 minutes. I actually put on my coat, got my keys, walked to the front door, then stopped. Because if someone has to beg for a seat at your table, the seat isn't really theirs anymore. I hung the coat back up. That decision hurt, but it also felt strangely peaceful. A little after 8 o'clock, my phone buzzed. Not Emily. A text from the Community Warming Center. Winter weather was getting worse. Volunteer help might be needed. I volunteer there a few times a month. Nothing heroic, just helping folks stay warm during rough weather. Making coffee, moving supplies, listening to lonely people talk. Sometimes that's enough. I texted back, on my way. The center sat in an old church building downtown. When I arrived, the place was busy. Several homeless men had come in from the cold. A couple elderly residents from an apartment complex had lost heat temporarily. People were drinking coffee, watching television, trying to stay warm. For the next 2 hours, I did what needed doing. Moved folding tables, carried blankets, fixed a stubborn thermostat, made bad jokes, the usual. By 10:30, things had settled down. The snow outside was falling harder now. The roads were getting slick. I said goodnight and headed home. The storm had picked up fast. Visibility wasn't great. My windshield wipers worked overtime. I drove carefully, no rush, nobody waiting for me anyway. About 15 minutes later, I spotted headlights at an odd angle ahead. At first, I thought it was a disabled vehicle. Then I got closer and realized it was a church shuttle bus. The front end had slid off the road and into a ditch. Not a major crash, but serious enough. The vehicle leaned awkwardly, hazard lights flashing, snow blowing sideways across the highway shoulder. I pulled over immediately, grabbed the emergency flashers, called 911. Then I got out. The wind hit me like a punch. Inside the bus, I could see movement. Mostly older passengers. A church group, as it turned out. People returning from a holiday event. Several looked frightened. One woman was crying. Another man appeared injured. The driver was trying to calm everyone down. I climbed aboard. "I'm David," I said. "Help is coming." That simple sentence to lower the panic level immediately. Years working utility emergencies had taught me something important. People can handle bad news. What they struggle with is uncertainty. I moved through the bus checking on people, helping where I could. Then something caught my attention. A damaged utility pole nearby. Not fully down, but damaged enough to concern me. A power line had dropped lower than it should have. Not touching the bus yet, but close enough that I didn't like it. Very close. I immediately told everyone to stay exactly where they were. No wandering around outside, no climbing into the ditch, no trying to walk home. The driver listened. Thank God. A few minutes later, I helped 2 elderly women step carefully off the bus once first responders deemed it safe. One of them was shaking badly. I gave her one of the emergency blankets from my truck. The other kept apologizing for being slow. I told her she reminded me of my aunt. That made her laugh. Then my boot hit black ice. I went down hard. My left knee twisted underneath me. Pains shot up my leg. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. A firefighter helped me up. "You okay?" "Depends how old you think I am." He laughed. I didn't because my knee felt about 90. By the time EMTs fully secured the scene, my hand was bleeding from a deep scrape and my knee was swelling. Nothing life-threatening, just enough to remind me that I wasn't 30 anymore. A local TV crew arrived shortly afterward. One reporter wandered around filming. She asked me a couple questions. I answered without thinking much about it. I was cold, tired, ready to go home. The last thing on my mind was television. Eventually, an EMT convinced me to let them check my knee. I sat in the back of an ambulance while snow continued falling outside. The reporter was still filming. The church passengers were finally safe. And somewhere across town, my daughter was probably opening gifts around a warm Christmas tree. I had no idea one of those gifts was about to change everything. The EMT wanted me to go to the hospital. I wanted my own bed. We compromised. They cleaned the cut on my hand, wrapped it, checked my knee, and gave me a list of reasons I should seek further treatment if things got worse. By the time I got home, it was a little after midnight. The snow was still coming down. Not as hard as before, but enough to turn the neighborhood into a quiet, white postcard. Most houses were dark. Christmas Eve was ending. I unlocked my front door and stepped inside. The house felt exactly the same as it had a few hours earlier. Quiet, still, a little lonely. I kicked off my boots and lowered myself carefully into my recliner. My knee protested immediately. Yeah, I muttered. Me too. The television was still on. Some local station was running overnight coverage of the storm. I wasn't paying attention. I closed my eyes for what I thought would be a minute. Then my phone exploded. Buzz, 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 buzz. I opened one eye. Several text messages. 3 missed calls. More notifications arriving every few seconds. For a moment, I thought something had happened to a family member. Then Emily called. I answered immediately. Dad? She sounded different. Not nervous, not awkward, shaken. Emily, what's wrong? A long silence. Then I heard her crying. Dad, why is your face on every news station? I sat upright. What? You're on TV. What are you talking about? You were helping those people. I looked toward the television. The local news station had replayed footage from the accident scene. And there I was, standing beside the bus, snow blowing across the road, looking older than I felt. And honestly, I felt pretty old. The station replayed the clip again, then another angle, then another. Apparently, the story had become one of the major local Christmas stories of the evening. Emily, I said slowly, everyone's okay. That's what matters. But she wasn't talking about the accident. I could tell. Something else had happened. Then she asked, why didn't you tell me where you were? I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because 6 hours earlier, she had told me exactly where not to be. I didn't think it mattered. That answer hit harder than I intended. Silence filled the line again. Finally, she whispered, Dad. Then she stopped, like she couldn't figure out what came next. Eventually, she said, good night. The call ended awkwardly. No apology, not yet. No explanation either, just confusion. I set my phone down. 2 minutes later, it rang again. This time it was Linda, my ex-wife. I stared at the screen before answering. Hello? David. She sounded uncomfortable, which was unusual. Linda rarely sounded uncomfortable. I just saw the news. Okay, are you hurt? That question caught me off guard. Nothing serious. Good. Then silence. Long silence. Finally, she said, Emily's upset. I looked toward the TV. The station was replaying the footage again. I imagine she is. Linda sighed. The kind of sigh people use when they're realizing a situation isn't going away. Maybe give her some time. I wasn't planning to do anything else. Another silence. Then she quietly said, good night. The call ended. 5 minutes later, Gary called. I almost didn't answer. Almost. Curiosity won. David! His voice was unusually cheerful. Quite a night, huh? I leaned back. Apparently, I just wanted to say that was really something. There it was, the Gary I knew, always eager to insert himself into whatever conversation was happening. Not malicious, just incapable of staying on the sidelines. He kept talking about the storm, about local news, about how crazy everything was. Then finally, Emily feels terrible. I said nothing. Gary filled the silence. She didn't mean to hurt you. Still nothing. Because whether she meant to or not wasn't really the point anymore. Eventually, he gave up and ended the call. I figured that would be the end of it. It wasn't. Not even close. The next morning, I woke up to dozens of messages. Former coworkers, old neighbors, people from church, folks I hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone had apparently seen the story. I spent the morning answering texts. Nothing dramatic, mostly variations of, glad you're okay, or saw you on TV. Then around noon, something changed. A former coworker sent me a link. Have you seen this? I clicked. The video wasn't about the rescue. Not exactly. It was a short clip from the reporter's interview. Just 20 seconds. 20 seconds that somehow had thousands of views already. The reporter stood beside me near the ambulance, snow blowing everywhere. She asked, do you have family waiting for you tonight? I remembered the moment, barely. At the time, I'd been cold, tired, and distracted. My answer had been honest, nothing more. In the video, I smiled, a tired smile. Then I said, not tonight. The reporter looked surprised. No Christmas plans? I shook my head. My daughter asked me not to come this year. That was it. That was the entire clip. 20 seconds. No anger, no blame, no bitterness. Just the truth. Yet people couldn't stop sharing it. Comments poured in underneath. Thousands of them. People telling their own stories. Stories about divorce. Stories about estranged children. Stories about spending holidays alone. Many weren't even talking about the rescue. They were talking about that sentence. One sentence. One painful little truth. By afternoon, local radio stations were discussing it. Community Facebook pages were sharing it. Neighbors were commenting. People I'd never met were arguing about it. The whole thing felt surreal. I hated it. And yet, part of me understood why it resonated. Because loneliness after 50 isn't something many people talk about. Not honestly, especially fathers. We talk about sports, weather, politics, knee replacements. We don't usually talk about being left out. Not directly. Around 4 o'clock, my phone buzzed again. A text from Emily. Just 3 words. Can we talk? I stared at the message, then set the phone down. Not because I was angry, because I genuinely didn't know what to say. A few minutes later, another text arrived. This one was longer. Dad, I just found the photo album. The final page made my chest tighten, because I knew exactly which page she meant. The last page. The handwritten note. The one I'd written while sitting alone at my kitchen table. No matter where I spend Christmas, you'll always be my little girl. For several minutes, I simply stared at the screen. Then another notification arrived, this time from a local journalist. She wanted to interview me, not about the rescue, about my life, about the volunteer work, about the man behind the story. And suddenly I had a feeling this whole thing was only getting started. The first thing I did was ignore the journalist. Not forever, just for a day, maybe 2. At 62 years old, I'd learned that not every ringing phone deserved an answer, especially when half the people calling suddenly seemed fascinated by my existence. The rescue itself wasn't bothering me, the attention was. I wasn't comfortable being the center of anything, never had been. When you've spent most of your life working utility emergencies, people usually only notice you when something goes wrong. You fix the problem, you go home. Nobody throws a parade because the lights came back on. That's just the job. The journalist called again the next morning, then sent an email, then left another voicemail. Finally, I called her back, mostly because I was tired of listening to my phone buzz. Her name was Rachel Bennett, 30-something, worked for a local Dayton newspaper. She sounded professional, polite, not sensational. Mr. Walker, thanks for calling. It's David. David, I'd love to talk with you. I already told the TV station what happened. I'm actually not interested in the accident. That got my attention. What are you interested in? The people who keep mentioning you. I frowned. What people? The people I've been interviewing. Apparently, while I was busy trying to disappear, Rachel had been making calls. Lots of calls. Former coworkers, church members, neighbors, people from the warming center, the bus driver, even a few passengers from the accident. And according to Rachel, they all kept telling stories. Stories I didn't know they remembered. One neighbor talked about the time I'd repaired her furnace for free during a January cold snap. A former coworker mentioned a scholarship fund I'd quietly helped support at a local trade school. The director of the warming center told Rachel I'd volunteered there for nearly 12 years. 12. I honestly hadn't realized it had been that long. One story after another. Nothing heroic, just ordinary things. The kind of things people do when they believe helping someone is easier than listening to them suffer. Rachel wanted to write about that. I told her no. She asked why. Because none of it matters. She laughed. Actually, I think that's exactly why it matters. That answer irritated me because it sounded smarter than mine. We ended up talking for almost 40 minutes. Afterward, I felt strangely exhausted, like I'd spent the afternoon defending myself against compliments. A few days later, her article appeared online, then in print. I expected a handful of readers. Instead, it spread even faster than the rescue story. Apparently, people like stories about old men who minded their own business. Who knew? Meanwhile, life kept getting weirder. Emily texted every day. Not constantly, just little messages. Checking on my knee, asking about my hand, trying to start conversations. I answered politely, but something had changed. Not out of revenge, not because I wanted to punish her. I simply didn't feel the same urgency anymore. For years, I'd been the one reaching out, the one making plans, the one checking in. Now I stopped. And for the first time, she seemed to notice. One afternoon, she called while I was replacing a broken shelf in my garage. "Hi, Dad." "Hey, you busy?" "A little." There was a pause, then, "Can we get lunch sometime?" I tightened a bolt. "Maybe." The words surprised both of us. Emily wasn't used to hearing "maybe" from me. For years, my answer had always been yes. I could hear her processing that. Not angry, just confused. Eventually, we ended the conversation. No argument, no breakthrough, just reality. A few days later, another story appeared. This one wasn't about me, it was about Gary. Sort of. One local television station interviewed several people connected to the rescue story. Somehow Gary ended up in the segment. That wasn't entirely shocking. Gary had a talent for finding cameras. The man could probably locate a news crew in a cornfield. During the interview, he described me as a great friend of the family. Then he talked about how close everyone was, how supportive we'd all been, how important family values were, the usual Gary stuff. The problem wasn't what he said. The problem was what happened next. Emily happened to be standing nearby. The reporter asked her a simple question. "Did your father always volunteer like this?" Nothing dangerous, nothing controversial, but Emily hesitated, just for a second, a tiny hesitation. Most viewers probably missed it. Rachel Bennett didn't. The internet certainly didn't. Within hours, people started connecting dots. Not aggressively, not like some online mob, just naturally. If everyone was so close, why had David spent Christmas alone? The question kept appearing. Nobody had a good answer, especially not Emily, especially not Gary. And for the first time, Gary seemed uncomfortable. I didn't enjoy that. At least I don't think I did. The truth is more complicated. Part of me felt guilty watching it unfold. Another part remembered sitting alone in my kitchen while everyone else celebrated Christmas. Human beings aren't always noble. Sometimes we're both things at once. A week after New Year's, Rachel called again. "You're not going to like this." "Then why are you calling?" She laughed. "Because you're being honored." I nearly hung up. "No. Yes. No. David," I sighed. "What now?" The city was organizing a community recognition event. Dayton heroes of the season, local volunteers, first responders, teachers, charity workers, people who had contributed to the community during the holidays. Apparently, my name was on the list. I tried declining, twice, maybe 3 times. The city refused, which seemed unfair. By then I learned something important. When enough people decide you're a hero, your opinion becomes surprisingly irrelevant. A formal invitation arrived in the mail the following week. I set it aside, forgot about it. Then Rachel called again. "You should probably attend." "Why?" "Because I just learned something interesting." I rubbed my forehead. "What?" There was a pause. Then she said, "Gary's business association is sponsoring one of the event tables." I sat quietly. "Okay." Emily and her family will probably be there. The room suddenly felt smaller. Not because I was nervous, because I knew life well enough to recognize what was coming. Sooner or later, all unfinished conversations demand payment. And after Christmas, there were plenty of unfinished conversations waiting for us. The event was scheduled for the first weekend in February, less than 3 weeks away. Neither Emily nor I knew exactly what would happen when we saw each other again. But for the first time since Christmas Eve, I found myself unable to sleep because something told me the hardest part of the story hadn't happened yet. By the time February arrived, my knee had mostly healed. Mostly. It still reminded me of its existence every morning. Getting older is funny that way. You stop measuring time by calendars and start measuring it by which body part hurts when you get out of bed. The community recognition event was scheduled for a Saturday evening at the Dayton Civic Center. I almost didn't go. Twice. The invitation sat on my kitchen counter for nearly 2 weeks. Every time I walked past it, I found another excuse. Too much attention. Too many people. Too awkward. Too unnecessary. but eventually I ran out of excuses. Around 5 o'clock that evening, I put on a navy blazer I hadn't worn in years. The sleeves felt tighter than I remembered, or maybe I was wider than I remembered. Could have been either. I drove downtown and parked across the street. The February air was cold enough to sting. Inside, the lobby buzzed with conversation. Local politicians, teachers, volunteer groups, police officers, firefighters, families, people shaking hands and pretending not to look at name tags. My kind of nightmare. A volunteer handed me a program. "Congratulations, Mr. Walker." I smiled politely. "Thank you." Then I immediately looked for the nearest coffee station. Some habits never die. I was pouring a cup when I spotted them. Emily, Gary, Linda, the kids, standing near one of the sponsor tables. For a moment, nobody moved. The distance between us couldn't have been more than 30 feet, yet it felt much farther. Emily saw me first. Her expression changed instantly. Nervous, hopeful, guilty, all at the same time. I lifted a hand. Small wave, nothing dramatic. She waved back. Gary nodded. Linda offered a tentative smile. Then the crowd shifted and blocked the view. Part of me was relieved. The event began shortly afterward. A local television personality acted as host. Various awards were handed out. Teachers, volunteer coaches, foster parents, people who genuinely deserve recognition. I spent most of the evening hoping my category would be skipped. No such luck. Eventually, the host walked onto the stage holding a card. "Our next honoree is someone who reminded this community what quiet service looks like." I immediately considered leaving through a side exit. Too late. The giant screen behind him lit up. Pictures appeared. Me at the warming center. Me helping with a trade school fundraiser. Me standing beside the church shuttle bus. The audience applauded. I wanted the floor to open beneath my chair. The host continued. "For over a decade, he has volunteered without seeking attention. Most of us never knew his name until recently." I glanced toward the back of the room. No escape route seemed practical. A minute later, they called me to the stage. The applause grew louder. I hated every second of it, and somehow appreciated it at the same time. Human beings are complicated. I walked up the stairs carefully. My knee still wasn't thrilled about sudden movement. The host shook my hand, asked a few questions, simple ones. How long had I volunteered? Why did I do it? What motivated me? Easy enough. Then came the question, the one I would remember for years. The host smiled. "David, everyone has heard about the rescue, but looking back, what was the hardest part of that entire night?" The room became quiet. I expected to give a safe answer, something about weather, something about fear, something polite. Instead, the truth came out. Not planned, not rehearsed, just honest. I looked at the audience, then down at the floor, then back up again. Helping those folks wasn't the hardest part. The room stayed silent. The firefighters got there fast. The EMTs did their job. Everyone worked together. I paused. A few seconds, no more. The hardest part was realizing my daughter thought someone else deserved my place at Christmas. Silence. Complete silence. The kind that only happens when nobody knows what to do with what they just heard. I hadn't raised my voice, hadn't blamed anyone, hadn't even said names. Yet everyone understood, including Emily. I saw her immediately. Her hands covered her mouth, tears running down her face. Not dramatic crying, the quiet kind, the painful kind, the kind people tried desperately to hide. For a moment, I regretted saying it. Not because it wasn't true, because truth has weight. And once you put it into the world, you can't pull it back. The host looked stunned. Then, to his credit, he handled it perfectly. He simply nodded. "Thank you for your honesty." Nothing more. No follow-up. No attempt to create television drama. The audience applauded, softly at first, then louder. Not for the comment, for the honesty behind it. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. When it finally ended, people approached from every direction. Handshakes, pictures, conversations. More attention than I'd received in the previous 10 years combined. Eventually, I escaped toward the lobby. I was halfway to the exit when I heard, "Dad!" I stopped. Emily stood behind me, alone. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she wrapped her arms around me, the same way she used to when she was little, the same way she hadn't in years. I hugged her back, because despite everything, she was still my daughter. When she stepped away, her eyes were red. I am so sorry. No excuses, no explanations, no mention of Gary, no mention of her mother, just 4 words. I am so sorry. The sincerity hit harder than any speech could have. I nodded. Thank you. She looked confused. That's all? I smiled sadly. What else is there? More tears. Then, can we fix this? I thought about that, really thought about it for longer than she expected. Finally, I answered, maybe. The same word I'd given her weeks earlier. Maybe. Not no, not yes. Maybe. Because forgiveness can happen quickly, trust usually doesn't. Emily understood immediately. I could see it on her face. For once, she wasn't asking for instant repair. She knew there would be work, real work, the kind relationships require. We talked for another 15 minutes, calmly, honestly. No fighting, no miracles, just a beginning. When we finally said goodbye, I noticed Gary standing across the lobby. He didn't approach, didn't interrupt, didn't try to explain himself. For the first time since I'd known him, he seemed to understand that not every situation required his voice. And strangely enough, that might have been the wisest thing he'd ever done. As I walked toward the parking lot, snowflakes drifted through the streetlights, the same way they had on Christmas Eve. Only this time something felt different. The story wasn't finished, but it had finally changed direction. People like clean endings. I understand why. Clean endings feel good. A person apologizes, another person forgives, everybody hugs. Roll credits. Real life is rarely that tidy. After the recognition event, Emily and I didn't suddenly become the perfect father and daughter again. She didn't come over every Sunday with fresh cookies. I didn't pretend Christmas never happened. We moved slowly, carefully, like two people stepping across thin ice. The first week after the event, she called twice. I answered both times. We talked about normal things. The kids, her job, my knee, the weather, nothing heavy. The second week, she asked if she could bring Ethan and Lily over for lunch. I said yes. Then I spent the whole morning cleaning a house that wasn't dirty. I vacuumed twice, wiped the counters, bought juice boxes, picked up the little crackers Lily liked. Then at 11:30, Emily texted, Ethan has a cough. Can we reschedule? I stared at that message longer than I should have. Old habits came back fast. The old disappointment, the old excuse making, the old voice in my head saying, don't make a big deal out of it. But this time I didn't answer right away. I waited, made coffee, sat down, then typed, sure, let me know when you have another date. That was it. No guilt, no extra sweetness, no pretending I wasn't disappointed, just a boundary, a small one, but mine. Over the next few months, I made several changes. Quiet changes, practical changes, the kind nobody sees until they matter. I met with my attorney, a calm woman named Denise Porter, whose office smelled like coffee and printer ink. We reviewed my will, my power of attorney, my beneficiary forms. Everything I'd been meaning to update for years. Denise asked careful questions. Are you making these changes out of anger? I appreciated that. No, I said, out of clarity. She nodded. That answer seemed to satisfy her. I didn't cut Emily out. That would have been cruel. And honestly, it wasn't what I wanted. But I changed things. Part of my estate would still go to her. Part would go to Ethan and Lily in a trust for school. And part would go to the warming center and the local trade school scholarship fund. For years, I treated my family like the only proof my life mattered. That was my mistake. They mattered. Of course they did. But they weren't the only ones. A month later, Emily asked me for help with a car down payment. Not a huge amount, but enough. In the old days, I would have said yes before she finished asking. This time I asked questions. What happened to the money you and Mark had saved? She sighed. Gary suggested we put it into that rental property deal. There it was, Gary again. I closed my eyes for a second. Not because I was angry, because I was tired. Emily, I can't do that. Silence. Then you can't? No. Another silence. Is this because of Christmas? No, I said. It's because I'm retired and I need to stop solving problems I didn't create. That landed. I heard it. She didn't argue, she just whispered, okay. I expected resentment. Maybe there was some. But a week later she called again. Not for money, just to talk. That was the first real sign things might change. Spring came slowly that year. Snow melted from the edges of the driveway. Birds returned to the feeder. My knee still ached when rain moved in, but I stopped complaining about it. Mostly, I kept volunteering. The warming center shifted back to regular outreach work. Food drives, repair days, paperwork help for folks who didn't know where to start. One afternoon, I saw a familiar face walk through the door. Mrs. Eleanor Brooks, 78 years old. One of the women from the shuttle bus that Christmas Eve. She had white hair, sharp eyes, and the kind of posture that said she'd spent her life refusing to be pitied. She pointed at me. You. I looked behind me. Me? Don't act cute. You're the man who kept telling me not to apologize for walking slow. I laughed. Well, you were apologizing too much. She started visiting the center every Thursday after that. Not because she needed help, because she wanted to help. She organized donated coats with the seriousness of a military operation. If someone put children's mittens in the adult glove bin, Eleanor corrected them like they'd committed a federal offense. I liked her immediately. Emily met her once. It was awkward at first. Then Eleanor shook Emily's hand and said, "Your father is stubborn, but useful." Emily laughed. I did too. That laugh felt like a small repair. Not a full one, but enough to notice. By early summer, Emily and I were having dinner once a month. Just us. No Gary, no Linda, no pressure. Sometimes we talked about old memories. Sometimes we talked about what went wrong. The first few conversations were uncomfortable. She admitted something one evening over meatloaf at a diner in Kettering. I think I was trying so hard not to upset Mom that I forgot I was hurting you. I cut a piece of meatloaf. That sounds about right. She winced. I didn't soften it, not because I wanted to hurt her, because truth spoken gently is still allowed to be truth. She nodded. I know. That was enough for the moment. In August, a letter arrived from the state. Ohio Senior Volunteer Recognition Award. At first, I thought it was junk mail. Then Rachel Bennett called and told me it wasn't. Apparently, the city had submitted my name. The ceremony would be in Columbus. Formal event. One invited guest. I knew what everyone expected. Even Emily expected it. She didn't ask directly, but I could hear hope in her voice when I mentioned the invitation. That's wonderful, Dad. Yeah, strange but wonderful. Do you know who you're taking? There it was, the question. I looked out at my backyard, at the bird feeder, at the empty patio chair where my old dog used to nap. Then I said, I do. A pause. Oh, not angry, just quiet. I'm taking Eleanor. Another pause. Then Emily surprised me. That's good, Dad. I could hear the sadness, but also the understanding. She should be there. And that was the moment I knew we might actually be all right someday. Not because she got what she wanted, because she accepted what she didn't. The ceremony in Columbus was nicer than I expected. Eleanor wore a blue dress and complained about the parking for 20 minutes. During the event, when they called my name, she squeezed my arm. Don't trip, she whispered. Thank you for the support. Anytime. I walked onto that stage with a sore knee, a wider waist than I had at 40, and a heart that had finally stopped chasing the wrong kind of approval. Afterward, Eleanor and I ate dinner at a little place near German Village. She ordered pie. I ordered coffee. We talked about ordinary things. Weather, family, bad drivers, good soup. On the drive back to Dayton, my phone buzzed. A text from Emily. Proud of you, Dad. I smiled, then put the phone away. Not because I didn't care, because I finally knew I didn't need a message from my daughter to make the night mean something. That was the revenge I never planned. No screaming, no public takedown, no ruined holiday dinner, just one old man learning that love should not require begging. I still love my daughter. I always will. But I no longer mistake being needed for being valued. And I don't save seats for people who only remember mine when the cameras are on. Sometimes family forgets your worth until strangers remind them. If you've ever been overlooked by people you gave your life to, I hope you know this. You still matter. And if this story stayed with you, share your own in the comments. Someone out there may need to hear it.